They make bad trades and bet on the wrong players. They have bad ownership, worse GMs, and too many disappointed fans. Here are the worst franchises in NBA history. Minnesota Timberwolves. The Timberwolves play in the coldest city in the NBA, which is not great for acquiring free agents. When you're a small market team, you have to draft well and trade even better. As you can probably guess, the Timberwolves are not known for that. Founded in 1989, Minnesota had been constantly losing until 1995, when they drafted Kevin Garnett. With KG's greatness and anything is possible mentality, the Wolves made the playoffs every year from 1997 to 2003. But because they never surrounded Garnett with a great supportive cast, they were ousted out of the playoffs in the first round every single time. And then in 2004, KG finally had enough quality teammates around him. The Timberwolves made it to the conference finals, where they lost to the Lakers in 6 games. After that came 13 cold winters filled with losing, bad draft decisions, and missing the playoffs. In 2018, with Jimmy Butler on the team, the Wolves snapped that losing streak and finally made the postseason. However, that short taste of success left a sour aftertaste due to Jimmy's infamous beef with the entire team and demand to be traded. In 32 years as a franchise, Minnesota made the playoffs just 10 times and won exactly 2 playoff series. They have the worst win-loss record in NBA history, winning just 40% of their games, averaging 32 wins per season. Sacramento Kings. Unlike most franchises on this list, the Kings actually have some championship banners. The only problem is that those who remember those championships are over 80 years old. The franchise won the title in its first year of existence. It was 1947. The Kings were then called the Rochester Royals, and the NBA wasn't even the NBA yet, as the Royals won the NBL championship. In 1951, the Royals won the NBA title against the Knicks, and from there, it was straight downhill. In 1957, the Royals moved to Cincinnati, where they remained for 15 years. The Cincinnati Royals managed to win only 2 playoff series in that span, despite having Oscar Robertson on the team, who was a perennial all-star and the best point guard of that era. In 1972, the Royals became the Kings and moved to Kansas City, where they would remain until 1985, when the franchise moved to Sacramento. In the next 13 seasons, the Kings qualified for the playoffs only twice, and they won their first playoff series in 2001. The next 2 years were the best in modern Kings history. In 2002, led by Chris Webber, Sacramento won 61 games and had the best record in the NBA. They made it to the conference finals, where they tragically lost to the Lakers in 7 games. To this day, this series remains one of the most controversial in NBA history, especially Game 6, because the referees made all the calls in the Lakers' favor. Next season, the Kings had the #1 seed again, but would fall to the Mavericks in the second round. The 2005-06 season was the last time the Kings qualified for the playoffs, and the last time they had a winning record. For 16 straight years, they've been losing, and their postseason drought is the longest in NBA history. Bad ownership, lousy GMs, drafting second-rate players instead of all-stars, laughable trades, and frequent coaching changes. That's all part of the Kings' DNA in the last 16 years. Ever since Chris Webber left the team, they've not only been the worst franchise in the NBA, but probably the worst in all major American sports. LA Clippers. Before 2021, the Clippers were one of 3 teams that never made the conference finals, and were considered by many to be the worst franchise in NBA history. The Clippers were founded in 1970 as the Buffalo Braves, and like any other new franchise, they weren't very good. However, it didn't take long for things to pick up. In 1973, their center Bob McAdoo won Rookie of the Year, and from 1974 to 1976, he led the NBA in scoring, winning an MVP award in the process. In 1976, the Braves drafted Adrian Dantley, who averaged 20 points per game and won the Rookie of the Year. Also in 1976, they added Moses Malone, who was an all-star in the ABA League. So for the 1977 season, the Braves had 3 phenomenal players all aged 25 or younger. However, by the end of the season, they had none. During the span of 1 year, the Braves ownership traded 3 future Hall of Famers and got back 3 bags of chips in return. The franchise then relocated to San Diego and chose the name Clippers. In 1981, Donald Sterling bought the team and promised to keep the franchise in San Diego. However, just 3 years later, Sterling made an unauthorized move to Los Angeles and had to pay a $6 million penalty. And even though they drafted future All-Stars in Tom Chambers and Terry Cummings, they traded them away also. The first time the Clippers made the playoffs under a new name was in 1992. The first time they won a playoff series was in 2006, and their 29-year drought without a playoff series win is the largest in NBA history. From 1976 until 2011, the Clippers had exactly 3 seasons with a positive record, and were considered the biggest laughingstock of the NBA. In 2014, their owner Donald Sterling was forced to sell the team team due to racist comments, which threw another layer of shame on the franchise. However, with the new owner Steve Ballmer, the Clippers are more stable than ever, and they made the playoffs 9 times in the last 11 years. Despite blowing a 3-1 lead in the second round of the playoffs in 2015 and 2020, they finally made it to the conference finals in 2021 after 51 years of existence. New Orleans Pelicans. New Orleans got its NBA franchise in 2002, when the Hornets relocated from Charlotte to Louisiana. New Orleans made a surprisingly great start, qualifying for the playoffs in their first 2 seasons. In 2005, they drafted Chris Paul, who led them to the most successful era in franchise history. In 2008, they had the 2nd seed in the West and won their first playoff series. But the problem was that New Orleans never knew how to build a team around its stars. After several disappointing seasons, CP3 asked to be traded, which paved the way for another superstar to arrive. In 2012, Anthony Davis was the #1 overall pick, and he was supposed to save the franchise. 1 year later, New Orleans ditched the Hornets nickname and became the Pelicans. However, history repeated itself, even with the new name. The Pelicans made one terrible move after another, never surrounding AD with enough quality players. New Orleans reached the playoffs only twice, and won only one playoff series during AD's 7-year stint, after which he famously demanded to be traded to the Lakers. Now they have a 3rd-generational talent in Zion Williamson and solid pieces around him. Maybe history will change this time around. Charlotte Hornets. Charlotte got its NBA franchise in 1988, and they quickly made a name for themselves. Nicknamed the Hornets, they had one of the most memorable jerseys in the entire NBA, and with players such as Muggsy Bogues, Alonzo Mourning, Del Curry, and Larry Grandmama Johnson, they were one of the most fun teams to watch. The 90s were very successful for the Hornets. Playoffs were a regular occurrence in Charlotte, and the team made it to the conference semifinals 4 times. However, in 2002, after the owner George Shinn wanted to relocate the franchise to New Orleans, Charlotte was left without the NBA team. In 2004, Charlotte got its NBA franchise back, this time as the Bobcats. However, the Bobcats never really had the charm and success of the Hornets. Their jerseys weren't as pretty, and they were extremely unsuccessful, even after Michael Jordan bought the team in 2010. The 2011-2012 Bobcats won just 7 games in a 66-game season, which is the worst season in NBA history. The Bobcats became synonymous with losing, and they reached the playoffs 2 times, but then got swept immediately. In 2014, they returned the name Hornets and the good-looking jerseys, but the results pretty much stayed the same, and they kept missing the playoffs. Michael Jordan was often ridiculed for poor GM decisions, and Charlotte's last playoff win happened 20 years ago. The Hornets and the Pelicans remain the only 2 franchises that never reached the conference finals. Washington Wizards. The Washington Wizards franchise started in 1961 as the Chicago Packers. Just 2 years later, they moved to Baltimore and became the Bullets, and from 1973 onwards, they reside in Washington. But the 70s were the golden era in Bullets history. Led by legendary Wes Unseld, the team qualified for the playoffs every season, including 4 trips to the NBA Finals. In 1978, Unseld led Washington to their maiden NBA title, and the capital city had a basketball powerhouse, or at least so it seemed. After 1982, Washington waited for the next playoff win until 2005, when the team was already renamed the Wizards. And even though they had several successful teams, mainly with John Wall and Bradley Beal, Washington never repeated the glory days of Wes Unseld. From 1979 until now, Washington has never reached the conference finals, earning them the longest drought in the NBA. New York Knicks. The New York Knicks are one of the oldest NBA franchises, and together with the Celtics, they are the only franchise that never relocated or changed its name. New York Knickerbockers were founded in 1946, and they lost the NBA Finals 3 times in the early 50s. It took 20 years for the Knicks to become successful again, and this time, they went all the way. In 1970, led by Clyde Frazier and Willis Reed, the Knicks brought New York its first NBA title. In 1973, they won another one with the help of Pearl Monroe, and these were the glory days in the Garden. The 80s were largely unsuccessful, but the 90s were not. Led by Patrick Ewing and coach Pat Riley, the Knicks became a perennial playoff team. When Jordan retired for the first time, New York made it through the East and got to the finals. Unfortunately for them, Hakeem and the Rockets were too strong, and the Knicks lost Game 7. And just when it seemed like Ewing got too old, and that the Knicks would miss the playoffs in 1999, they somehow made it to another NBA Finals as an 8th seed. They were the first and the last 8th seed to make the finals, but the Spurs made sure that that their Cinderella story wouldn't have a happy ending. Tim Duncan was too good, and the Knicks lost in 5 games, even though they left the decade without a title. The Knicks were a respected franchise with a tough defensive identity. That's why nobody could have predicted what would come next. In 1999, James Dolan took over the franchise, and slowly but surely, the Knicks started to turn into a catastrophe. Led by Dolan and president of basketball operations Isaiah Thomas, the Knicks started overpaying bad players, made terrible decisions in the draft, and generally ruined the Knicks' reputation as a winning franchise. In the new millennium, the Knicks qualified for the playoffs only 6 times and won only 1 playoff series. Despite their famous teams in the 70s and the 90s, almost everything after 2000 was a complete disaster. Bad decision-making and no stability turned the Knicks into a mockery, and New York has become one of the worst franchises in the NBA.